Michael, I really struggle that something like this can be conceived in a nation like this, because I think it's un-Australian. What's the American perspective? What's your American perspective on that? Because of, you know, the land of the free, the home of the brave.
I mean, it's shocking. I mean, I found myself very disoriented. I testified about 4 times. I testified 4 times before Congress on this issue over the last 2 years. The first time I testified, I admitted that I was disoriented.
Did they call it Misinformation Disinformation Bill there too?
They do. They use that Orwellian language of misinformation.
That's all over the world.
They don't call it censorship.
So when it confronted the American way of life, what?
This is my reaction as well, is that my first reaction, I would never in my younger, more radical left days imagine myself saying it, but for me, this was the most un-American thing you could do, is to create elaborate bureaucracies of committees of so-called experts to decide what was true and false. It's anathema not just to liberal democracy. Science can't function that way. Science functions with disagreement. We can't really think properly without some amount of disagreement, without the things that you take for granted are often wrong. Testing things. You know, the journalists, we had a press conference out here in the Parliament, and the journalist said, well, how are we going to fight misinformation without this legislation? Well, you'll fight the misinformation the same way that you do every day as a journalist, by reporting the truth. How else could you possibly do it? I mean, we have most publications have a policy of issuing corrections. It's humiliating to make a mistake as a journalist. You issue the correction and you become more humble and you become more careful as a result. But heaven forbid that you'd have, committees of people deciding what was true or false.
If you have a committee deciding what John says, for instance, from the IPA is true or false, wouldn't they then be seeking a way to be relevant?
Yes. Yes, it's the lifeguard syndrome. You give somebody a little bit of power. Well, you give these people a little bit of power, and they want to justify their jobs. They want to hire more staff beneath them. They want to. The natural tendency of all bureaucracies is to grow larger. So you end up with this expanding censorship bureaucracy. I mean, we call it the censorship industrial complex because it does have its roots in the military industrial complex. It does have these figures from the intelligence and military community, but we call it in the United States a self-licking ice cream cone. It just ends up growing, metastasizing larger and larger through the bureaucracy. It's exactly what George Orwell worried about. The totalitarianism that Orwell worried about wasn't a totalitarianism imposed by tanks. It was a totalitarianism that came out of the bureaucracies. In fact, he read James Burnham, who wrote a very similar argument around the managerial state, that as societies grew more complex, you do need a government to manage it, but then that bureaucracy becomes so powerful that it seeks to really dominate the society and dominate and eliminate many of the freedoms.
Well, I think just by your visit, you've gone a long way to help us to destroy what we call the MAD Bill, the Mis and Disinformation Bill, which looks like, because of the efforts of the IPA and a whole lot of other people that have been involved in this, will not go ahead in Australia. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Thank you for your leadership.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Russell.
All the best.
Yeah.